to Know Christ, a television ministry of the Lutheran Church of Peace in Platteville, Wisconsin. Here is your host, Reverend Jeff Pedersen.
Today's lesson is entitled Casting Stones. Casting stones. You know, I must say that one of the things that I enjoyed as I was growing up is playing baseball. And not only just playing the game of baseball, but one of the things that, and I still continue to enjoy it to this day, even though I'm not out there playing baseball, I just enjoy playing catch. I like to just throw the baseball back and forth with somebody. I can do this for a long time. And so I throw the baseball, and I must say that when it comes to a lot of things, I'm just not all that great at it. But when it came to like passing a football or throwing a baseball, it all came rather naturally for me. And so I would always pride myself in, like when whoever I'm playing catch with would have the mitt here, that I would be able to throw it accurately so that you wouldn't even have to miss or move the mitt. And so when I was in high school, that's one of the things that I was. Then I was a baseball pitcher. And so that's kind of the fun of playing catch then is, to start, using different movements with the wrists and the grips on the ball and motions and things like that to get different spins happening with it. And it's just like, wow, look at that. Isn't that cool how that ball can just curve in like that? And then also I would start to pride myself in the fact that, the knuckleball. I would have a way of throwing a knuckleball where that ball would not even spin, but it would kind of move around, this way and that way. And so it's a lot of fun. And so it's one of those things of repetitive motion. I think people who are into archery or bowling, or I know some people who are very good, matter of fact, national champion horseshoe pitchers. And so it's just practicing that same motion over and over again until you become very accurate. But that's one of the things that I want to say, especially to the young people who may be listening, is that practice makes perfect. It's not like you can say, I'm going to go for baseball. And then the coach asks, well, what position do you want to play? And I want to play pitcher, when you've never practiced it. I mean, that's one of those skilled positions. Well, with baseball, like anything, they all are skilled positions. You have to have a certain amount of practice to get skilled at catching the ball, fielding it, throwing, but then also, hitting the baseball, that's a whole other thing. But I think I've said enough about this to make the point, is that we become accurate. Not perfect, but that we become accurate. And I'm not trying to stand here today saying that as a pitcher that every pitch that I threw was a strike. No, there were a lot of players that got their free pass to first base. But what I am getting at, though, is when it comes to judgment, we may find ourselves casting stones. Now, it's one thing casting stones, trying to hit maybe a fence post with a stone, or just sometimes going along a lake where we find a smooth stone where we can skip the stone, and that's a lot of fun. But when we are judging other people, and we think that we are so accurate in our judging other people that we can take a stone and throw it at the person. Now, the only confidence or hope that I would have if I were living in the time of Jesus or in the Old Testament times, where if you were caught doing certain things, you'd be stoned to death, the only hope that I have is that this person hasn't practiced their pitching very well, and they're just simply missing me as they're casting their stones. But the fact of it is that sooner or later, one of these stones will hit you. And if there's enough people who are pelting you, there's, maybe these people are going to be missing with a lot of their throws, but they're going to be hitting you enough. And if they hit you in the, in the head or someplace like that, that's pretty much the end of your life. And so number one, we get very concerned about who's judging us and how accurate they are in their judgment. And then if they do believe that they are accurate in their judgment, then what are they going to do as a follow-through of that judgment? What is the consequences? What will be now the consequences of that judgment? Will it be picking up stones and throwing them? Or will it just be a lot of verbal assaults? Breaking, well, at least in the Lutheran tradition, our understanding of the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against our neighbor. And so somebody now is upset and angry with you. Sometimes they will verbally, in an angry way, be spitting nails at you, but also they're going around town and saying things that are just simply not true. And so even though they're not accurate in their judgment and they're not accurate in what they're saying, that somehow what's happening, though, is that enough people are hearing these inaccuracies, these lies, to where your reputation has been destroyed. Well, they didn't kill my body, but they basically have killed my life around here. What can I do now? How can this be restored? And I think that's the lack of love again. It's the lack of love, where my love for you is such that you're nothing but a worthless pawn on my chessboard, and I can just, poof, there you go. Okay, but then sometimes maybe we are accurate in our judgments. So what do we do with that then? What's the healthy way to proceed? And certainly God has given to us a lot of teaching to say, well, if a brother or sister has done you wrong, this is what you do. Or if you have done what is wrong, this is what you do. Okay, well, I'm going to read you a story. It's maybe a story that you've heard before, or as I read this story, you're thinking, oh, that's where this statement came from. You know, so many statements that we hear, they originate from the Bible. And so let's see if you pick up maybe the one statement that we may hear often. So I'm going to read from John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, and the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Well, Jesus was at the temple teaching. Matter of fact, that's what they called Jesus a rabbi. And that's what a rabbi was a teacher, a Jewish teacher. And so he would go to the temple and he was teaching. And I don't know what his lesson was going to be that day. You know, that's kind of the thing about life, is that sometimes this is what we have planned, but then this is what God has us do. Or I remember when I was working on a farm, we'd have our day planned, but then based on certain things that would happen, that this is actually the day that was lived. Like if a piece of equipment or a machine broke down, or if an animal got sick, or if a building caught fire and burned down. You know, all the things that come up saying, well, this is what we had planned to do today, but this is what we actually did. So here again, what we plan and what actually happens. And so here's Jesus' lesson plan was here. I had no idea what he was going to teach about that day at the temple. But all of a sudden something happens where all of a sudden, now this is the teachable moment. You know, and that's one of the things, is that it's kind of serendipitous, where this is what I'm going to have, this is what I want to teach, but this is what ends up being taught. And what ends up being taught is far greater than what I'd ever planned on teaching to begin with. I mean, this was the teachable moment, and this is now the time where everybody is open and ready to learn, and it's now a lesson that we will never forget. And so that's what's happening here with Jesus. Is that as he's teaching the people, and I have no idea, it's not like we hear the speech before, because sometimes, you know, especially, you know, as we, you know, read, you know, in the Gospel, sometimes you have the story within the story. So it's not like, well, we hear the first 2 points of Jesus' lecture, and then all of a sudden now this happens. But what happens is, as Jesus is teaching, the teachers of the law, okay, they would be like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. These are people who are well versed in the law. They knew right from wrong. It'd be hard to get into a debate with them. A lot of times, you know, I think the wisdom of people is to say, whatever you do, just don't get sucked in. Don't get into their whirlpool, because if you do, even if you, in a sense, win the debate, you've lost the debate with them. So don't get into an argument with them. But that's what they wanted to do. Is that, why were they there? Were they there to say, oh, here's Jesus. We want to listen to him and we want to learn. No, they weren't there to listen and learn. They were there, like so many times, to trap him. And because they were so well versed in the law, they knew what the laws were. And based on, I think, over the course of time, they knew what the proper responses to the law were. It's just like, you know how ingrained something is, to the point where now you also know that the responses that we are to make based on that is also kind of the patented answer that is also ingrained. It's like there's no room for situational ethics here. And so they're trying to, and this is not the only time. You know, I probably could have a whole series on the questions that the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the teachers of the law were using to trap Jesus. Okay, well, this would be one of them. Maybe we could just call the series The Trap. And so it was to trap Jesus. So they bring out this woman, and they make a public spectacle of her, saying, we caught this woman in adultery. And so based on the law of Moses, the consequences of that would be that this woman should be stoned to death. But the teachers of the law only have half of it here. It's not only her, but it would also be the man who is involved with this. After all, it does take two to commit adultery. And so they were not being, so I don't know, if anything, I think Jesus could just say, well, we're going to throw this case out of court. Because you haven't brought the man here. And so we think that this woman probably was just harassed, accosted. Maybe she actually had committed adultery, but where's the man? If this is really going to be a complete case, then the man should also be there to be stoned. Okay, well, let's just say that they weren't trying to trap Jesus and they did catch this woman in adultery. Let's just say that they did. Let's say that their judgment was right and they got their stones in hand, and based on how much they've practiced their pitching, they should be pretty accurate. And that was one of the things when I was young in high school and the time that I was describing. I just remember having a snowball fight with friends. And I remember throwing the snowball at my friend. I saw him a ways. I was throwing it at his head. And guess what? I hit him right in the head. And it hurt him. I was actually shocked that I hit him. Because I just figured that I would miss. But the thing of it is that when you spend this much time training yourself to do something, more than likely now you're going to succeed at whatever it is that you're doing. If I spend all my time pitching a baseball and then when I take a snowball and I aim it at somebody's head, guess what? More than likely I'm going to be hitting the guy in the head. And that's the thing that we have to understand. And so this poor woman, she's frightened. She's brought out into public, and all the community people now have got their stones. And even though probably they would be throwing more balls than strikes, all it takes is one strike. Remember King David when he went up against, or when King David was a boy, he went up against Goliath. He had 5 stones in his sling. Well, it just took one. Why? Because like the baseball pitcher, he spends his time practicing. He took 5 stones, probably thinking, well, it's probably going to take me at least 3 or 4 tries, but no, just once. One. And if this is what these people are about, is throwing a snowball at somebody's head, or a rock at this woman who's committed adultery, more than likely they're going to succeed at it. And so let's say that Jesus wasn't teaching. And let's say that Jesus wasn't even there. And we begin to wonder how many times situations like this happened, where a woman was just pelted to death on the street. But fortunately for this woman, Jesus was there. And it really wasn't this woman that was the target, though. The target really was Jesus. That's the one who they really wanted to stone. It's Jesus. And so they're trying to trap him. They're trying to trick him by using this. Well, Jesus, basically, as we all got our arms and our stones and all cocked ready to throw, that basically, Jesus, at this point, if you really are a teacher of the law, and if we are really to take you seriously, that you would be the one to basically say, fire, throw. Ready, aim, throw. But Jesus didn't do that. He didn't say, ready, aim, throw. But how does he handle this situation? He writes some messages in the sand. Here again, we don't know what that message was. I think we all have been kind of curious. What was the message that he wrote in the sand that all these people read? Because whatever he wrote, it changed them. It transformed them. Did he write things about the other people? I mean, after all, Jesus was God, saying, okay, you're going to be stoning this person who has committed adultery, but understand, I also know that you have committed adultery. And you over here, that you are stealing. And you over here have been cheating. You over here have taken God's name in vain. You know, the list could go on. But somewhere, it's got to be a message of have mercy. To where they all dropped their stones. And finally, they all dropped their stones and they left because they've all been accused, in a sense. Meaning that if we stone this woman, then who's going to be next? We all deserve to be stoned this day. And that's the whole thing, is that we all have sinned. We all fall short of the glory of God. And so as we cast judgment on other people, that we first of all have to look at in the mirror and to say, well, have I done anything wrong this day? Have I had any bad thoughts? Have I said anything? And if we're honest with ourselves, we say, well, instead of taking out the log in my neighbor's eye, I better instead of taking out the speck in my neighbor's eye, I better take out the log in my own eye. Meaning that, the person I need to be most concerned about here is the one in the mirror. And that's where we finally get on our knees and say, Lord, have mercy on me. And so that's the whole thing about judgment. And thinking that somehow that I can put myself in the seat of God, that somehow I'm the one who is righteous, and I'm so good that I can now judge everybody else based on my template of who I am. Because after all, a lot of times we can begin to think that I'm living my life exactly the way that God would want me to, and so now I can be in judgment of others. And so this is where ultimately, these Pharisees and Sadducees, they wanted to stone Jesus to death. But here again, and based on all of the writing in the sand, they dropped their stones, they left. And Jesus said to this woman, well, where are they? And they said they have left. And Jesus says, well, I don't judge you either. But he does say, you go now and live a new life. And so that's one of the things about God's judgment, is that he forgives us. I mean, that's the love and the grace that has been poured out into this world in Jesus, because as it turns out that the religious leaders and, then the political leaders and eventually the whole crowd, what did they do? Well, they didn't stone Jesus to death, but in public, they crucified him to death. And that's the whole thing about humanity's self-righteousness, is that we want to be God, we want to be the judge, and so that's where we get our stones in our hands. And for whatever that reason that day, everybody maybe didn't have their stones, but they had their hammers with their nails to nail Jesus to the cross. And so it did eventually happen, but lessons were taught. And lessons continue to be taught. And so Jesus, he loved this woman not only to save her from all of these people who wanted to put her to death, but he also wanted to make sure that she was forgiven and that she was taken care of. But more than that, it was like, I just don't forgive you so that you can go back living this horrid life that you've been living. And that's one of the things that we have to realize, is that as the world is condemning us, that Jesus forgives us. But he wants to transform us and to say, I got a better life for you. Go live it. Live in the forgiveness. And so that's where, when we are judging, that we are taught, we are not to judge. Judge not, lest you be judged. For the very standard and measure for which you judge will be the standard and measure for which you judge others will be the standard and measure that you will be judged then. But rather that we show mercy, pardon, and peace, like Jesus did, that we forgive those who have done wrong for us. And so if somebody's troubled us, we go to that person individually and we work it out. We have forgiveness, and then we're reconciled. If we can't do this individually, then we get other brothers and sisters in Christ involved who can also help in this process. Because that's what God wants for all of us. That if somebody does you wrong, you pray for them and you do good for them, and soon you will win your brother or sister over, rather than just pelting them in the face with stones. But always giving it to God, that God will always deal with these people in his own loving, gracious manner and in his own time. But there is also something to be said, that if we have done something wrong, that we are willing to admit it, and that we be humble to go to this person and say, I'm sorry, I did wrong, will you please forgive me? And I will do what I can to make amends for this. And to say that I want to be a good brother or a sister to you in Christ, and I want to have a friendship, and I feel very bad for what has happened. And so there's humility both ways, that we ask for forgiveness, but also when people are begging our mercy, that we show forgiveness, or we show mercy and forgive, just as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven each one of us.
You have been watching To Know Christ with Reverend Jeff Pedersen, pastor of the Lutheran Church of Peace in Platteville, Wisconsin. The worship schedule for the Lutheran Church of Peace is Saturday night at 6 p.m. and Sunday morning at 9 a.m. A collection of Pastor Pedersen's Christian books can be found at Amazon.com. His latest book is called Sharing Our Faith in the Covenant of God's Grace. Thank you for watching, and tune in again next week for To Know Christ.